Even if somebody doesn't get it, they're like, that rancher's taking Bitcoin as payment. My doctor in Austin takes Bitcoin as payment. And it's difficult to criminalize people that look like that. Where it's like, well, it's just a doctor taking payments. It's just a dentist taking payments. It's just a rancher taking payments. You stack enough of that, you make those people that are otherwise trying to restrict and constrain your freedoms more ridiculous.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Stephan Livera podcast, brought to you by swan.com. Rejoining me is my friend Parker Lewis. He's the author of Gradually Then Suddenly, which is a great book. Well, it started as a blog series, it's now a book. He is also at Zaprite. So Parker, welcome back to the show.
Hey, it's good to be back, Stephan. It was good to see you a couple weeks ago at BitBlock Boom. And it's been too long since we got together to have a conversation like this. So excited to be back on the show.
So there's a lot of things that have been going on in the space. I mean, the Samurai Wallet guys were arrested. Phoenix and Async have exited the US. Wasabi has exited the US. There's the Roger Ver arrest as well. What are you making of all this?
Yeah, I think that it's not coincidental, but maybe a surprise to some people that these actions that you're really kind of the specific action that the Department of Justice, Southern District of New York has taken against the Samurai Wallet founders and operators comes just on the heel of the Bitcoin ETF being approved and launched in the subsequent months. I do think that, having that and keeping that in context, because when the Bitcoin ETF was launched, it was really approved, or the series of ETFs that were launched that followed the approval by the SEC. The SEC approved that begrudgingly, and that there's other interests in the United States. Someone who's very vocal in opposition to Bitcoin is someone like Senator Warren, and that it's also not surprising that the Department of Justice and likely allies within the U.S. Treasury Department and FinCEN would ramp up their essentially legislation by prosecutorial discretion and by enforcement actions. So I think that my personal perspective is there's a lot to digest in the Samurai case. It does seem like it's going to have a chilling effect, and that I think that you though also have to look at every individual circumstance differently and uniquely. I think that Samurai is certainly different from Phoenix pulling out of the U.S., and it's certainly, even though Wasabi Wallet operated a mixer similar to Samurai, it was different. And I think that I don't fault someone who's running Wasabi from doing that, but just also recognizing that each company's facts and circumstances are different. And then when you then compare individual companies and the nature of their services to other companies that are entirely different and not similar, that they shouldn't all be lumped together. I do think that there's the possibility that people overreact, but I also think that it is a good stress test. Not that certainly not wanting anything bad to happen to any individuals, but I think it is really going to have the broader effect, even if the near-term impact may be chilling the type of activities or even what people are willing to say about it in the U.S., that in the end, in an aggregate, the consequence will be that everyone has just gotten a kind of shot across the bow, a very loud signal, and that combination of the way things build people, or the way people build tools, as well as at the individual level, to groups of people becoming more active in defending the rights of Bitcoin and Bitcoin holders within the United States and abroad, will be heightened as a result of this. So I do ascribe, not to make light of it at all, but in the economic theory that Keynesians push, that everything is good for Bitcoin. And that in this case, everything being good for Bitcoin, meaning that the tools that get built will be built more consciously, given the latest sets of actions. But then also, I think it will become a call to action that people within the Bitcoin community need to not just be more proactive, because I think there has been a lot of advocacy, but needs to be a lot more strategic and recognize that we're playing for keeps now, and that this also wouldn't be happening if the legacy financial system wasn't weak, wasn't fragile, wasn't tenuous itself, and that at some point, I think everyone realistically knew that these type of things would happen and happen in an accelerating way, maybe just not as soon as today.
Yeah, and so you made a good point around the way tools have been built in this ecosystem, and I think we should go into that a little bit because now, to be clear, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert on the US regulatory environment, but as I understand it, FinCEN came out with some guidance, and some of that guidance has been followed over the years in terms of how products and services were built in this ecosystem. So I will point out that sometimes people confuse the term mixer with CoinJoin or non-custodial CoinJoin, and I think there is a difference in the way some of these services were constructed. So as an example, Samurai Wallet, Wasabi Wallet, Join Market, these are non-custodial tools, and there is a difference of character in that the user who holds those private keys is obviously they're using these coordinating softwares, whether it's Samurai or Wasabi, to self-send in a CoinJoin fashion, but that has historically been seen as different to, let's say, custodial mixers. And so I know there was the Bitcoin Fog case, and I believe Chip Mixer. And so in those cases, historically, the courts saw a difference there between a custodial mixer and a non-custodial service. And you could also argue that many services that have been built with that kind of self-custodial focus, right? Whether it's Unchained Capital or others out there that have designed their service in this way. What do you think it means now that the US government seemingly, or at least the prosecutors, are trying to overturn this or go back on what was previously FinCEN guidance?
Yeah, and I think that there's a few things that I would say kind of on the front side, which I agree with you completely, that the way things are built and the nature of the service is and the facts and circumstances, which someone like FinCEN or DOJ or anyone would specifically say that it's specific to the facts and circumstances of a certain service, a certain tool, a certain company. I think that there are a few things that are at play, and one of the things that when I read through some excerpts, I read through the full indictment, but I believe there have been responses to the Samurai case. I haven't read the full response, but I did go back and reread the 2019 guidance. Is that there's a difference between law, there's a difference between rules making, there's a difference between guidance from FinCEN, and then there's a difference between the DOJ and the Department of Justice, and there can be areas within both rules making and guidance, as well as selective prosecution, that interpret laws that can stretch the meaning of those laws or the intentionality of what was meant. And then those are all ultimately tested in the court system. And that I think, again, and I'm not a lawyer, but recognizing that FinCEN, because basically what the Department of Justice is saying is that, FinCEN is not necessarily the authority on this, which throws everybody into chaos, because we're all from people. When I say we, anybody that's building infrastructure within the United States is relying upon the guidance that the Financial Crimes and Enforcement Network, that is a unit of the U.S. Treasury Department, is sending out. They're sending out their interpretation of law, and then in this case, the Department of Justice has functionally interpreted the law different than, or in conflict or in contradiction to what the Treasury and the Treasury Department and in FinCEN has said. And so when I personally read the FinCEN guidance. And again, they were from 2019. We're in 2024. Typically, if there's an update to guidance, they will update it. But that is also one other caveat, that 5 years has changed. And, if their interpretation has changed, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to put out, a new set of guidance, even though that is traditional practice. Is that in that guidance, they specifically talk about anonymizing services. And then they differentiate that from anonymizing software, right? And so basically, and they distinguish, and one of the things in my own interpretation, I think this is something that everyone who's building infrastructure to serve the Bitcoin community or Bitcoin holders in the United States, but particularly everywhere, needs clarity on, is in the FinCEN guidance from 2019, and then also in private letter rulings that they had linked in that guidance, they specifically refer to money transmission as accepting and transmitting, and that it's both of those things together. You accept funds and then you transmit funds. You accept funds from one person and you transmit funds from another. What the Department of Justice is trying to seemingly stretch the definition or potentially change the meaning of a law or of a statute is saying that you don't actually have to accept and transmit to be a money transmitter. And then if you are a money transmitter and you don't have the proper licenses, then you've committed a crime. And so understanding this important distinction that based on everything that FinCEN had put out, and then there were also in these private letter rulings where they would expressly say, you never had control of funds, you never control funds, therefore you're not a money transmitter. And then when you think about that in the context of the Samurai case, that they never were in control of funds, and the Department of Justice admits such, they're trying to change the scope of what the word money transmission means. And, creating law, in my personal view, creating law via enforcement actions and criminal complaints is not the right way to create law. We might not agree with a law that said, any coin join service, whether custodial or non-custodial in the United States, is not lawful. We might not agree with that, and then that could be challenged. But then at least there would be a law that states that, passed by legislators, not the interpretation of one district in the state of New York. And so my reading of it says, when they talk about anonymizing services, they say anonymizing services are money transmission, but it doesn't talk about, who's running a server or not. It specifically talks about accepting and transmitting funds. Basically establishing that, if you were to read that text, that their definition of anonymizing services would be a custodial service. And then when they talk about the fact that, anonymizing software and it depends on who's running the software and whether the person running the software is a money transmitter, but the software itself is not money transmission. And so such that if you developed a tool and then open sourced it, and then the Samurai case seems to fit in a gray area, but where there is a gray area in terms of the interpretation, to anyone that I think, setting aside the Samurai case, because I do think there's specific circumstances set out to them that make them unique, is this lack of clarity on this idea of can you be a money transmitter if you never touch any money? Because to a common sense person, they would say certainly not. Based on all FinCEN guidance that previously existed, it would say certainly not. And based on FinCEN private letter rulings, it would say not. And in that case, I would also be very surprised if there's ever been a DOJ case against somebody accusing them of violating a money transmission law without having ever been in possession of funds. So I think that certainly when you read through the indictment of Samurai, that complaint, that what is at the forefront is the money laundering aspect of it. Their alleged knowledge of that activity ongoing on their platform, and then not taking steps to prevent that. I think that absent those facts and circumstances, it would be very it would be very difficult to conceive a case like this being brought against somebody else that wasn't in possession of money, and that doesn't make their complaint valid. I think it just is a kind of more broad recognition that if not for the other elements of what they allege, specifically related to money laundering, would this case be brought? But then it becomes certainly relevant to everybody building, to people like Phoenix, to people like Wasabi Wallet. Wasabi Wallet looks a lot similar. Again, facts and circumstances of their business very different than Samurai, but similar at the same time, and different just in terms of how the tools work. So ultimately, I think that what it will come down to, or my perspective, or where everyone would gain clarity, is this definition of money transmission, and also recognizing that for that to change, a statute really needs to change, and that's law. And we could either agree or disagree with it, challenge that, but that to me seems the right way to carry forward. And so I would caution people not to overreact, but to start taking it extremely seriously and start becoming very active in terms of advocacy. And my perspective on that is that we need a new class of advocates that are just Bitcoin focused, that don't lump Bitcoin in with everything else, because everything is so different when you get into facts and circumstances just within Bitcoin and the different segments of how Bitcoin works, and also its significance and just size and merits its kind of being legislated or regulated on its own and not confused with everything else that exists in the world.
So in terms of Bitcoin industry and advocates responding, do you have any thoughts there on what people should be doing? Is it a factor of donating to these particular cases? Is it a matter of donating to some kind of Bitcoin lobbying and advocacy organization? What do you see that Bitcoin people should be doing?
I don't have my full fleshed out thoughts, so I'm hesitant to go into too much details. But I think that historically, the historical advocacy groups that have been quasi advocating for Bitcoin have demonstrated to be unsuccessful. I think so. What I would say is very clearly, Bitcoin needs to be in its own bucket. People need to start saying the word Bitcoin, sunset digital assets, sunset the consequence of lumping in all snake oil that doesn't have to do with Bitcoin, and just focus on Bitcoin, such that if there are advocacy groups that push that other narrative, those other things have proven to be unsuccessful. I think that also, personal opinion, Washington, D.C., and that federal landscape, albeit we have good advocates in the U.S., like Senator Lummis, like someone like Warren Davidson, like someone like Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, that it's not to say that the work that people are doing in Washington, specifically from inside those bodies, is not important. It's very important. But I think from the Bitcoiner side, it is getting, for people in the U.S. specifically, it is actually getting through to people at the state level, and that there's no shortcut around helping somebody understand Bitcoin. Because in order for them to be able to distinguish and understand why they need to protect rights for Bitcoin holders and enumerate Bitcoin specifically, they have to have some of their own primary firsthand understanding about Bitcoin that isn't rooted into what a lobbyist says. And then it comes to finding people in those local states, kind of local, jurisdictions like the state of Texas or the state of Ohio that are actually willing to do that work and are actually principled people, because there's so many politicians that aren't principled, that are there for the power. And so I think it is, Bitcoin is still small in the grand scheme, so we don't have these massive budgets to go lobby. You have to be hyper strategic and hyper tactical and hyper conscious of both the limitations of time as well as the limitation of money and resources to be effective. So it's to focus on Bitcoin, to sunset or shed the blockchain association, with Bitcoin, and to also be tactical in terms of the venues, because I think the thing that will ultimately be in specifically in the United States, but also I think it will serve everyone in the world, is that if this becomes a state versus federal battle, and that rather than me as an individual or as a company or Samurai as individuals or Samurai as a company, that or Phoenix or Wasabi or whoever else is out there, certainly like it's impacting a broad set of people, that it's not individuals and companies fighting this fight, it's states fighting the federal government to protect the rights of its citizens. And so I think going to the state level in the U.S. specifically, helping them understand Bitcoin and why they should care, is a important input or precursor to actually getting meaningful things done.
Yeah, so you mentioned this importance of getting state lawmakers to understand Bitcoin. Now, I agree with you, but let's say somebody's listening and they're thinking, well, Satoshi left when Gavin went to the CIA, or people have other arguments like, oh, don't engage with them, just write code, or you're never going to get through to them, you're better off trying to write code. What would you say to that? Why should you focus on getting lawmakers to understand Bitcoin?
I think that it's certainly both, right? Being conscious of how the tools are made and to make tools that protect those rights, but that the people that are building those tools, like we've seen the chilling effect that civil litigation can have on people, from the Craig Wright is a fraud people and using the UK as a DDoS against Bitcoin developers, or other people like Peter McCormick. So that is a reality, and it has an impact on the ability for people to build tools, because people do not, there's a certain class of person that is certainly willing to develop tools and accept the reality that the FBI could show up on their door for doing nothing wrong, for operating in their own mind, that completely consistently with the laws and the spirit of the laws in the country that they live in, and that those laws and that system, they're run by somebody. And so my personal perspective is you can either engage in that and start to influence that for what is right. And the other thing I meant to mention is I think that the right way to approach it is to enshrine the rights of Bitcoin holders. I genuinely believe at some point in the United States, when Bitcoin is won, we're going to have to pass an amendment that specifically says Bitcoin, that you have the right to use Bitcoin and transact in Bitcoin and mine Bitcoin. It doesn't mean that if you commit some other crime and use it as money that you're not guilty of a crime, but that those type of rights that we have only become rights by a group of people forming a consensus and getting those changes to law or changes to a constitution done. And so I think it is that it has to be both. Otherwise, freedom doesn't really exist if we have to build tools just to run from a state that has run amok, because if it has, it's going to find you, and it's going to, in the real world, cause you serious consequences.
Back to the show in a moment. CoinKite.com are my favorite providers of Bitcoin hardware security products. Now, when it comes to securing our Bitcoin, as we say, it's not your keys, not your coins, and you need to learn to use some of these different tools to help create your private keys offline and then keep your private keys offline. And that's where some of these devices like the Cold Card Mark IV or the new Cold Card Q device can come in and help you, because they can help you create your private keys offline. You write down your 12 or 24 word seed, and that helps you interact with the Bitcoin network in a self-sovereign way. And so you can use these devices easily with software such as Sparrow Wallet or Electrum or Spectre or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now, the really cool part is that you're keeping the private keys offline because you're signing in an offline way. So if you're a beginner, yes, you can just directly plug it to the computer, but you can use these devices also in an air-gapped mode. So for example, the micro SD card, which is available on the Mark IV, or you can also use micro SD cards on the Cold Card Q. And the Cold Card Q also has an extra way, which is this QR code. So you can scan and read it back that way. and do your transactions also in that fashion. So there's a range of different features and ways that you can improve your security, but you can just start basic with a single signature hardware wallet, and then later think about, okay, do I want to do a passphrase? Do I want to use BIP85? Do I want to use Seed XOR? Do I want to use multi-signature? So these are all some of the things that are available to you. The Cold Card and CoinKite team are always innovating and putting out new products. They have a range of different products. So for example, the Tap Signer is a cheaper device for those people who want a specific, different kind of UX. That's also there. They also have the Seed Plate, which is a way for you to back up your seed words in a metal product. So there's all kinds of products there. Go to coinkite.com to get yours and use the code Livera for a discount over at coinkite.com. As you mentioned, there's this idea of having the states push back against the federal, and I wonder if you see parallels there in terms of drug legalization. That might be another area that we've seen this kind of states versus the federal government come at odds, right?
Yeah, I think so. And there's, I'm not an expert in law. I do pay attention to it, but thinking about ways that the federal government has, say, overreached, or I think like one of the examples is with drugs in the United States, the outlawing of marijuana as an example was basically a federal law that many people challenged the constitutionality of, but then there's the federal government has the ability to regulate interstate commerce, and if your bank functionally touches the Federal Reserve, then money is moving all over the place, and now the federal government has a way to legislate this. I still think at that time that's why something like a constitutional amendment will likely be important at the end of the day. But to the analogy that you raise is states started saying, hey, we view this as unconstitutional. We're going to start passing our own laws, and then we will be in the position of battling the government. It doesn't mean that the federal government couldn't come take an action on an individual, but a state attorney general could intervene or just more directly take that fight up on behalf of its citizens. And that really, in my view, is the underlying foundation or genius of the U.S. system, is that there's these, or not initially, but now today, 50 sovereign states that have an affiliation and a federal constitution, but that most all other things are relegated to the states that aren't expressly enumerated. And so I do think that that is the right analogy, where if certain states start to take that action, that, hey, we're going to give you clarity, and then if there's something that seems to be in conflict versus what a federal action is, then we will go take that fight up with the federal government. And that doesn't prevent the federal government from taking an action, but you have a lot more, you have a much better chance, and you're in a much better position, at least in the United States, if it becomes of interest and of significance to a state government and a state governor and a state attorney general to take on that fight. So I do think it is a good analogy, and that as enough states get behind it, then it shifts the will of the federal government to continue to try to enforce things that are realistically, kind of legislation by rules making rather than actual law.
Yeah. And so if we are moving into the then they fight us stage, or then they fight you stage, as you said, having at least some states on side is a valuable thing there. Can you comment there in terms of any advocacy work you've been doing at the state levels? Obviously, I know you're obviously quite involved in advocacy as well. How has that gone, trying to educate politicians and lawmakers?
Yeah, so I've done all of my advocacy to this point has been informal, not creating an entity and paying lobbyists. Part of it's informed by my personal view that paying lobbyists is just a way to further the same broken system, and that the only way through this storm is to actually help principled people understand Bitcoin, and then put those principled people that are legislators in a position of doing their job better. I like to think about it like, hey, if a state senator or a state representative in like the state house, or a federal senator or a federal representative in the U.S. House of Representatives, if they understand Bitcoin, they're and they align from a values perspective, which to me, there's, at BitBlock, we might give a presentation called "There's Nothing More American Bitcoin." They will be able to do much more to defend Bitcoin and the rights of Bitcoin holders than paying a lobbyist. And so, to this point, my advocacy has been more getting to and in front of politicians and helping them understand Bitcoin, and then also just running around the state of Texas and hosting meetups all over the place, helping individual citizens understand Bitcoin such that they can then take that advocacy to the people that they know, that there is a strength in number, but then also that the consequence of that growing number of people that understand Bitcoin is that more and more relationships exist, more and more relationships exist to people that are actually part of that legislative or governance function. I have, as in the past, had thoughts of doing something on a more formal basis rather than just guerrilla tactics and very organically. And now with this coming up, kind of these recent regulatory actions or actions by the DOJ and companies pulling out of the US, I've been thinking more about, hey, maybe I do need to actually create a formal entity to do the things that I think should be done in terms of shedding the compromise on calling everything a digital asset, and also just being more strategic and tactical about how we go about it, in terms of influencing people and turning people. It's kind of split between my time working on my book and how much leverage I can get from getting that out, as well as time working on Bitcoin payments and saying, okay, kind of, in the balance of how you spend your time, where do I get the highest leverage of being, kind of most consequential? And it's not to say I don't view advocacy as worth my time. It's that it's hard to do all three of those as one. So in an ideal world, I'd help support somebody who had that formal platform that really aligned with the values perspective. And I haven't found that place yet. But now with everything that's happened in the past week, but realistically, it's been on my mind for the past several months, is kind of dusting that off and trying to put something more formal in place, because being more active actually at the Capitol building and in front of the governor would I think be a worthwhile exercise. It's just there's only 24 hours in a day.
Yeah, and with educating politicians, I think it can also be funny seeing the response in kind of Bitcoin communities. Sometimes there's like a negative response to that. It's seen as like, oh, why are you simping for that politician, or why are you trying to do this thing, or you're trying to put your faith into this politician, when they'll just turn around and screw you over anyway. What do you think about that?
That's why I really think that you have to focus on people that are principled, people that will stand behind Bitcoin because they have their own knowledge of it, and they're doing it because they understand from their own perspective why it's important and why it's important to their constituents. There are a lot of unprincipled politicians, and I think that, when I say a lot, the vast majority. So if you walked up to your average, like as an example of what I wouldn't recommend, I look at my district here in Austin, and the guy who is the House representative in the US, like zero chance, so I don't spend time working on him. But then, if one of the, regional officers from Ted Cruz's office comes to the Bitcoin meetup in Houston every month, it's like investing time in those people to educate so that they can then educate. So it's really finding the people that will be principled and recognizing or at least accepting that they might be few and far between, and because time is so scarce, that trying to educate somebody that's a brick wall or doesn't have incentives or has demonstrated themselves to have values that might be in contradiction to underlying American values, that it's not worth just going and talking to any politician. That it is best to be tactical, but that if you find someone that is principled, someone like Senator Lummis, that then they advocate and help take actions without being asked what to do or told. I think once you get in the world of working through lobbyists, you're just paying a lot. You're fueling that swamp essentially, and that it doesn't actually get anything done. It's just paying someone to horse trade, and they'll slowly infringe on your rights and tell you that.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair way to put it. In terms of chilling effect that we might see, do you think that will change the behaviors of Bitcoiners in the United States, or even of companies inside the United States? Like, will there just be maybe more of a focus on just buy and hodl instead of actually spending Satoshis?
I don't think so. I do think that everyone will certainly be more conscious of it. I also expect that there will be certain people in the short term that are impacted by it and don't want to um, deal with the potential that something that might ultimately be a very small risk could turn out to be somebody knocking on their door and taking away their freedom. So at both times, is like, yes, certainly, and we're already seeing it. Certain, Phoenix Wallet pulling out, Wasabi Wallet pulling out, not conflating those two businesses, but just recognizing that that is a real chilling effect. At the same time, people are going to continue to build tools for Bitcoin in the United States. People are going to continue to challenge, and defend their rights. That's the only way, in my opinion, to ultimately get to the other side of this fiat conundrum and fiat storm, and that there is an underlying survival instinct, right? Like I don't view Bitcoin as a nice shiny object. I view it as something that is imperative to get out of this massively imbalanced, fragile economic system that is functionally on the verge of collapse. And so the only way through is to build on Bitcoin and to turn Bitcoin into a fully functional currency that can facilitate direct commerce, and that my personal view of it, it's not really a personal view. I think it's just an objective fact, objective truth that money, and you were talking about at BitBlock Boom, the distinction between quantity of money and quality of money. In order for something to be an effective store of value, it has to be able to be freely exchanged. And the reason why money is such an effective store of value is not only because it has certain properties and is one of those properties being over time the greatest liquidity, but it also has the greatest diversity of liquidity because there is an essential choke point. When you start to think about Bitcoin's liquidity, each time a merchant says, I'm willing to accept Bitcoin as payment, Bitcoin's liquidity has grown, but the quality of its liquidity has also grown. The diversity of its liquidity has grown. Because that is an absolute necessity, because having a good money is necessary to a functioning society, there is this survival instinct that says, okay, between two, difficult positions, what am I to do? Not build the thing that we absolutely have to have and put somebody else in the position to do it, because I believe somebody else will. But if we're each faced with that internal conflict, the overwhelming, kind of instinct, once some of the recency bias or freshness of these recent actions comes, that it will be back to focus, but then heightened, be more conscious, be more cognitive, and then be more active in terms of doing outreach, not to change laws, potentially to challenge, suing the government. That's a very popular thing to do in the United States. And it's also proved over time, even though it's been painful, to be highly effective, and to take all avenues. So I think that in the short term, yes, but in the grand scheme, I think that there's enough freedom-loving people that know they're on the right side, not just of history, but in the spirit of the tools that are being built, the purposes that they're being built for, and the underlying necessity of them to our future freedom.
Yeah. And let's chat a little. While we're here, let's chat a little bit about Zaprite, because obviously this is quite related. Can you just tell us, what's the latest with Zaprite, and what are you working on?
Yeah, so yeah, it is definitely hyper related. We're still kind of in the process of going through all of our assessment. We have a regulatory perspective that historically, based on all prior interpretations, Zaprite's not a money transmitter. What we are is a Bitcoin payment gateway. And kind of some of the background and to me working on Zaprite was rooted in one, wanting to be paid myself and not believing that the thing that I thought should exist existed, or not in the form or fashion that I thought it should, as well as when there was a slew of bank failures last year in the United States, it heightened this need to focus on developing the tools that would make Bitcoin payments accessible to more people and to hopefully help contribute alongside other great companies, projects, open source or otherwise, working on the same, broadest level goal, because in my view, it ultimately is that necessity. And when those bank failures happened last year, it really sharpened my own thinking around saying the time to do this is now. And it might have been yesterday too, but it's certainly now. And so Zaprite's going well. We're still very early. We've been offering subscription services for about 6 months. We're really focused on a few principal type of applications, individuals and businesses issuing invoices, as well as e-commerce, things like payment links, but also connecting e-commerce stores. And ultimately what we do and kind of our, I won't say unique approach, but the approach that we've taken is to be in this position where we are a payment gateway. We're not a money transmitter. We're not a payment processor. Again, certain of the actions that the DOJs take might be interpreted to say that we are, but I think when, anybody realistic, even if, under, reading the same interpretation that we would steer far clear of that. But that basically people connect their wallets, their Bitcoin nodes to Zaprite. They can connect custodial accounts, non-custodial accounts. They can also connect fiat rails of payment. Our kind of vision of this is one of the ways to make it easier for businesses to adopt Bitcoin payment is provide one integrated way for them to receive both fiat and Bitcoin, because we recognize that fiat is a rail. It does exist. It is still necessary. Only, maybe 1% of the world has shifted onto a Bitcoin standard. The other 99% haven't, and you need to interact with both of those economies. And the way to get more businesses to accept Bitcoin is by providing that seamless solution to offer both, and to do it in a way that it's not just philosophically. We think strategically the best way to do that as a Bitcoin payments company is to be in a position where you're not a wallet, not because we, just don't want to hold or transmit money. It's that the idea of being a software provider that's facilitating payments is very different than being a wallet provider. And that when you try to do both of those in the same company, it's not just the wrong product. It also, if you think about especially a young early startup like Zaprite, being resource constrained, there's two different entire skill sets or really pieces of infrastructure from a wallet versus a payments interface, a checkout, connecting those two things together, being, more of a fintech company than a bank. And so, that's what we're working on. It's going well. We're seeing massive acceleration and businesses coming on the platform, albeit we are, starting from a small base, but very confident that the product that we're delivering based on customer feedback and just metrics is something that the market has needed, wanted, but hasn't been there before. And so just having fun talking to those brave individuals on the vanguard that have a business that want to accept this payment and want to turn Bitcoiners into their customers.
Back to the show in a moment. Swan.com is the leading place to buy Bitcoin, and the Swan team has a mission to onboard millions of people into Bitcoin. Now, the team have been working really hard to update the Swan Bitcoin app, which you can find on the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. So the team have created a really slick and smooth experience. So now you can go from zero to Bitcoin in just a few minutes. So if you have family and friends who you are struggling to get them onboarded, well, Swan Bitcoin application is a great way for you to help them. You can be standing there right there with them, and in just a few minutes, they can have been onboarded and be buying Bitcoin. And Swan are making it really easy to do this because now there's zero fees on the first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys that you do. And it's not just for new customers, it's also for existing customers. So remember to tell your friends and family to go to the App Store and search Swan Bitcoin, install the app, and get started with Bitcoin with Swan Bitcoin. This show also brought to you by Mempool.space, the leading Bitcoin and blockchain visualizer. I use it all the time when I am about to send a Bitcoin on-chain transaction, and I'm often just checking the site anyway, just to keep an eye on where things are at in Bitcoin's mempool. Now, you can search transactions, take the transaction identifier and search that in Mempool.space, and of course you can see the mempool in terms of unconfirmed transactions. You can see all kinds of information about the different transactions, such as whether it's had RBF, replaced by fee, signaled on, and the team are always rolling out new ways to explore and view the chain. And so you can see Bitcoin on chain, you can see the Lightning Network, you can see the Mining Explorer, there's a Liquid Network Explorer for those of you who want to see that, and they are continually rolling out improvements. They've also got an accelerated program, which you can find over at mempool.space/accelerator. So go and sign up over mempool.space/accelerator. And now, back to the show. Yeah, and I think something you were saying that got me thinking from what you were saying earlier was bank failures earlier, right? And this is, a year or two ago, this is really big in the news, right? A lot of people were talking about SVB and the other, Silvergate and one other bank. Anyway, the point being, it kind of brought that front and center, right? Because there might be a lot of people who were just hodling Bitcoin, but had they really set up the rails to be able to do something if your fiat system breaks down, do you really, could you really transact with Bitcoin? Like, have you got the wallet set up for it? And, whether that's paying your staff, whether that's receiving payment from your customers, whether that's you as an individual, have you done the drill of learning how to, use your Lightning wallet as an example? So I think these are really important questions for any Bitcoin hodler advocate, that you should just be aware of what tooling is out there and what tooling you would actually use if something came to pass like that.
Yeah, that's really important. That's an important point that I do like to emphasize that you keyed in on there. One, part of this problem of this inherently fragile banking system in the U.S. and really globally, the entire, whether it's in the EU or Japan, those financial systems are functionally fragile and practically insolvent. And that when the bank failures happen in the U.S., the first thing that people realistically worried about, and when I say realistically, also very reasonably worried about, was how am I going to make payroll on Monday, right? That was a common thing that people were concerned about, specifically the commercial business customers that were at Silicon Valley Bank. And when you think about that, it is, I have a certain amount of savings on my balance sheet. Think about it as my Bitcoin in treasury. Well, if that is not there, but in this case it's dollars, if that's not there, how do I pay the people that I need to pay? But the bank is also, and the fragility of the financial system is also a risk from a Rails perspective, because it's also how businesses accept payment. So the first order problem might be, okay, I've got an existing level of savings and I can't use that to pay the people or other inputs that I need to fulfill and deliver the service that I'm offering as a business. But then the immediate next consequences, well, I'm also now suddenly cut off from my customers. So I can't replenish my savings. And both of those are equal problems at the end of the day. And that the right way, or at least I think a credible way for a business owner to be thinking about Bitcoin as payment is, if you've recognized, and really we're marketing this tool first to Bitcoiners, we're building it for people that actually want the Bitcoin. But if you first started to understand why Bitcoin stores value, the importance of its fixed supply, then it becomes very logical that you also recognize this fragility of the legacy system, and that, like, somewhere in the US, a bank is in the process of failing. Is that your bank? You don't know. Now, you might have a couple banks for that reason, but there's a series of bank failures happen because the system is insolvent, and functionally every bank is over leveraged. If they didn't print money, they're going to print money to quote shore up the banks. That has the consequence of causing the currency to fail over time. And if you've recognized all that, or at least are on that path where you first clicked why Bitcoin effectively stores value, then you start to look at Bitcoin and its rails as a redundant rail to the legacy system. And if that currency of the legacy system is a risk, then the rails of that system are a risk. And then you start seeing Bitcoin payments and the rails as a way to de-risk your business and the future of your business. Because just because you've invested in your business and reducing the uncertainty to have that ability to be paid doesn't mean that you still can't be connected to the fiat rails. And then the point that you made that I think is so prescient, it's one, if you haven't done that before, if you wait to the actual flood, if you wait to the point that your bank has failed, you're already lost. You've waited too long. It doesn't mean that you can't come back from it, but you will have endured a lot more pain than had you been set up previously and trained your customers that, hey, this is available, and if you want to pay me, you can pay me with this. And then to appreciate in that process that you actually got to invest in the infrastructure first. You need to do that before you absolutely have to have it. It is an actual investment in your business. There might be other benefits like reducing costs and other things, but it's an investment in your business to create a redundant rail. And if you haven't ever sent a Bitcoin transaction, or you haven't actually received a Bitcoin transaction, if you were scrambling because you have to do something rather than preparedness, and then see the benefits that come from your business, that if you've seen the benefits that have come to you as an individual by holding Bitcoin, you start to translate to holding Bitcoin in your treasury as a business rather than having, the fiat melting ice cube. The same exact thing happens once you turn on the light to start to accept Bitcoin as payment. You go through the same learning process, actually using the tools, and now you have another tool in the war chest, to be able to have that redundant rail that, I like to think about, there's a central point of failure in the US system. So all the banks are fragile, but that New York Fed is a central point of failure. You think about the construction of the Bitcoin network, all these nodes, you could have multiple nodes, multiple service providers, such that one thing goes down, another one comes up, and you're not cut off. That the Bitcoin rails are so hyper redundant that it's far more resilient as a system, and that more business owners, and I'm hearing this as consistent feedback from the businesses that we're onboarding, that as soon as they start to think about it as, I'm making this investment in my business to protect it, reduce uncertainty, reduce a risk, and then start to observe on the other side the value that it unlocks by being able to attract Bitcoin holders and incorporating in a broader strategy. It's those things together that really make this work in aggregate. And so part of what we're doing is building the tools, but the other side is going out there talking to businesses and helping them understand the importance of it. And that we think we're contributing to the entire ecosystem, that we're not here to compete with the other companies working on payment solutions that are each tailored to different type of markets. It's to kind of get behind that wave to help usher in the next orders of magnitude, 10x, 100x, 1000x number of businesses that start to just say that I'm going to invest in this infrastructure, and you can now pay me in Bitcoin. And I'd actually prefer that if you're willing to.
And I guess it's important just for listeners to understand that it's kind of like a bring your own wallet solution as well, because you can hook up different things to to Zaprite, and it's kind of helping you glue those aspects together, right? It's not that the merchant is having to kind of use a Zaprite wallet or something like this. It's more like they hook up their LND or their, and there's integrations as well from a fiat side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's you connect a Bitcoin wallet, you connect a Lightning node, you can connect an LND node, you can connect a Strike account or an IBEX account. So, kind of ideally trying to meet the customers where they are, whether that is custodial on their side or non-custodial, and then also connecting their fiat rail. So if they have a Square merchant account for fiat payments, they can connect that into Zaprite, or a Stripe account, they can connect that into Zaprite. Consequentially, we don't ever touch money. And so, in that world, again, it's not just because we don't want to touch money and we don't want to be a money transmitter. We're certainly not a payment processor. It's that we're providing these rails of access where when somebody comes to your business checkout and they pay that, it goes straight to them. It doesn't first come to our entity and then we withdraw it to your wallet. In that world, we actually simplify our business by not having to, like, if you think about somebody like Strike or someone like Unchained or someone like River or Swan, their their core business, in terms of they have a service where they help people buy and sell, but ultimately on the underlying Bitcoin side, it's I've got to secure this Bitcoin and I need to help it come in and go out. And the most consequential spending is how it goes out in terms of security. Well, if we can remove that from our business and start to become complements to all of those companies, then we can just focus all of our energy on the payment experience. Focus on the next commerce platform to integrate it to, improving the feature set around payments, specifically the payments enablement in Zaprite. So it is a good point to say you bring your wallet. So you have to have some way to receive Bitcoin that is compatible, but anybody can pay it. If somebody has a Lightning connection to Zaprite, anybody coming with a Lightning wallet can pay that. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin, because it is interoperable, that all of these companies that are building, whether it's non-custodial nodes or custodial wallets, they all speak the same language. So we can operate in this world where we can focus on the actual payments experience, the checkout, kind of what the payer is experiencing on their site, as well as how the individual is receiving it. Just essentially saying, hey, if you already accept Bitcoin in terms of like that it's real and that there's a 21 million and you're not accepting it as your business, but you get why it exists and why it's important, you have already figured out how you're going to hold your Bitcoin. And in order to receive Bitcoin as payment, we shouldn't force you to change how you've already decided. So if you're a cold card user, awesome. If you like Trezor, awesome. If you're a Ledger user, great. If you like Unchained, awesome. But then again, if you're not ready for that step and it's Strike, connect a Strike account. And we hope to connect, all the other platforms as well. We've got Strike, Ibex. We're working on a few others right now. We hope to get River and Cash App talking to folks there. But the idea being that you connect your method of payment and anybody can pay it, because Bitcoin is interoperable. They just have to be sending from a Bitcoin wallet or from a Lightning supported wallet.
And I noticed, interestingly, there was a recent blog post you guys had about the Mutiny connection. Now, listeners, I had an episode with Ben Carmen sort of recently as well from the team at Mutiny, but that one looks pretty interesting as well, because it looks like, as I'm just looking at the article, basically Mutiny Wallet has a feature where if you buy Mutiny Plus, you can basically hook it to Zaprite and set up your Mutiny Lightning address. And then so that might be a really easy way. Let's say you're a listener and you're like, how do I help onboard my local merchants? Maybe Mutiny, if it's just kind of like one-man band, one guy with his app kind of thing, maybe Mutiny might be an easy one there, because it's just kind of the app,
and it doesn't necessarily have to be one-man band. It's like, hey, if there's, say it's a business owner and he has a complicated business and he wants to receive Bitcoin payments non-custodially, right? He could create a Mutiny wallet. And I believe my understanding is you got to upgrade to Mutiny Plus and have access to a federation, and then you basically have a fediment essentially. Then you have a Mutiny Lightning address. You just take that Lightning address, pop it right into Unchained, acknowledge terms of service, and go. And then you connect that Mutiny wallet to a Zaprite payment link, a Zaprite invoice, if you have a WooCommerce store. And so it's any Mutiny user that wants to receive their business Bitcoin payments to that wallet can then do that. And that's the beauty of it, because if you even think about that, think about the Mutiny guys, awesome team, awesome wallet, working on a wallet. If I also had to think about building the wallet as well as the commerce solution, I'm going to be worse at both those things, but Mutiny can focus on the wallet. We can connect Zaprite to Mutiny, and then anybody who otherwise chooses to use the Mutiny wallet has these commerce solutions at the ready for them. And if you think about if you had to do all those things at once, not only would you move a lot slower and be able to ship a lot less, but whatever it is you're building is actually going to be worse, because you're having to marry two skill sets with limited resources.
Yeah. So let me just compare. I'll try to give a bit of context for listeners as well, because maybe you're new or maybe you're not familiar as much with kind of the intricacies. Historically, if I wanted to go teach somebody to be a Bitcoin merchant, I might have had to sort of coach them through how to set up a BTC Pay. You might have had to set them up how to do their own Lightning node and their own channels. And then kind of receive sat and like configure the BTC Pay, receive sats into that, then send that out into an exchange and sell it there. Now, to be clear, BTC Pay also have some integrations as well. So it's kind of all the apps are kind of getting easier over time. But I think the ecosystem and the different options that are available now, as an example with Zaprite and Mutiny or Zaprite and various other things that you can connect to it, it just makes it easier. And part of this, I see it as it's a bit of a race against time, right? Like we're trying to help onboard more people to be able to use Bitcoin. So that they can adopt Bitcoin. And so if we can make it easier for them to onboard, that's just all the better for everyone. And so I think kind of, like VJ has said as well, it's kind of like the Uber strategy. We need to kind of get enough people comfortable with Bitcoin, using Bitcoin, that it just becomes too politically untenable to really ban the thing and stop it that way. Now, I don't think an outright ban is coming. I think it's more like regulation might come that makes it difficult to sort of have the freedom vision of Bitcoin, right? And maybe that's one criticism people have. They have this idea of like, oh, maybe you Bitcoiners, you're going to get your NGU, but we're not going to be free anyway, like because it'll all be in these kind of, custodial BlackRock platforms or whatever. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's where common sense and like you can't take the black pill, the common sense, freedom loving American in the spirit of, thinking about inalienable rights, in the context of, can I sell my beef for Bitcoin? And can I hold that money myself? Like if somebody tells me no, then they have gone to such an absurdity that there are enough common sense people that love freedom that will reject that. And that if you add enough of those people up, there's no way to functionally stop that. And that's not to say that they can't stop an individual or two, but that the absolute value and the absolute necessity of it and like how ridiculous and absurd it is. Like think about like we onboarded KC Cattle, who's a ranch in Kansas City, and they're literally selling beef directly for Bitcoin. And if you start to think about what a Bitcoin transaction is and what a private key is and what's happening in that, it's like I have the ability to accept data and then have another piece of data, a private key that's securing an amount of Bitcoin, and I'm willing to take that in return for a piece of steak that I've spent years perfecting a craft around. That is ultimately what's happening. I'm literally taking some data in return for a cow that's refined into cuts of beef, right? And that there is some cognitive dissonance for certain people where it's like, I do think there's a quantity of it, but then when people look at it and they're like, okay, wait, even if somebody doesn't get it, they're like, that rancher's taking Bitcoin as payment. My doctor in Austin takes Bitcoin as payment. And it's difficult to criminalize people that look like that. Where it's like, well, it's just a doctor taking payments. It's just a dentist taking payments. It's just a rancher taking payments. You stack enough of that, you make those people that are otherwise trying to restrict and constrain your freedoms more ridiculous. And realistically, we could do the same thing. I think it's ridiculous when the SEC chairman gets on the stage, on CNBC on his soapbox and says that Bitcoin's functioning for criminals. And I don't know why these guys don't say, hey, are you calling Paul Tudor Jones a criminal? Are you calling Bill Miller a criminal? Those other people that we have on the show. Like there's ways to turn the, kind of Bitcoin as a store of value on its same head. But also when you start bringing into the mix doctors and ranchers, Main Street people that are accepting Bitcoin as payment, you can use those as tools, as examples to say, Elizabeth Warren, do you hate the rancher? Do you think that the rancher that literally produces the food that you eat is not capable of making the decisions on his own, and that somehow this is supporting terrorism? No, you're the one that's being ridiculous. And so the more people, sheer volume that are doing it, but also just the nature of it. Like there's just all these good natured people that have been so fed up about having their money destroyed that they're going to take actions that are necessary to ensure, their future prosperity and survival. And that, some of those instances that then can be turned around to be used to demonstrate just how obscene certain other actions are, that like those, like we will win, when it comes to that we're not just going to say, oh, and like everyone's just going to use, custodial, and then they're going to figure out how to regulate it away. It's like, no, this thing, Bitcoin, is seeping into every nook and cranny in the world. It only works because, in my mind, it's both everywhere and nowhere all at once. Essentially, nodes are ephemeral. You can shut off. You could leave your node behind as long, private keys are permanent. Nodes are ephemeral. You can light up another node somewhere else, and that, if they couldn't, make gold go away, or if they couldn't, stop booze from going away and prohibition, if you start to understand the way that Bitcoin works and human nature, like we are going to find a way to use Bitcoin custodial or non-custodially. That is whether somebody pronounces it, it is an inalienable right. It is common sense, and it's also by necessity to do that because, as has been demonstrated, financial institution failing after financial institution, that the best way to protect that is on your own and to take agency and accountability. So it's like it's a gravitational force. It doesn't matter what regulation happened and whatnot. The regulations will ultimately map to it because it's a force that can't be stopped.
Fantastic. And lastly, let's chat a little bit. I got the chance to finally get my my real life copy of Gradually Then Suddenly. So thank you for that. And in fact, I bought that on Zaprite as well. So I paid with Lightning for that. Generally I try to earn and spend with Bitcoin and Lightning wherever possible. Just give us an update on the book and how things are going on the book side.
Yeah, it's going well. I've been having fun. It was great to finally get it out there in December. I'm sorry, I sent the book to Stephan, and then it routed back to me like 3 months later, but just in time, or maybe 2 months later, but just in time for BitBlock Boom. And then coincidentally, or not coincidentally, but serendipitously, I had written a note to Stephan, but forgotten to actually sign it. So I was then able to sign it and personally deliver it. Otherwise, I'd just have to, give him another book. But no, it's been going well. I didn't have a lot of expectations in. It was an important project for me to kind of memorialize or have an artifact that I could physically hand to someone. I think that one of the reasons why I wrote it was because so many people that I had come across and just day-to-day life, going to meetups, being around the Bitcoin circuit, had mentioned to me how valuable it was to them to working through challenging frameworks to think about Bitcoin. And so that then kind of inspired me to turn it into a physical book, because I think there's certain people that if you send them a link on the internet, they'll read it. The experience of reading something physical is actually better than being on screen, and that I'll be able to reach more people. And that one of the things that I try to do in my writing historically that's then been incorporated in the book is kind of break up Bitcoin into these not necessarily bite size, but kind of individual themes, individual frameworks, helping them really structure the book into three different parts. One, kind of the most fundamental rabbit hole, is bottom-up view of Bitcoin as money, but then another on the common misconceptions that I think are particularly helpful to people to understand why it's not too valuable, or why it's not too slow, or why it's not for criminals, why it can't be banned, why it doesn't waste energy, and then also helping them understand the problem. I think, kind of historically, my career came from the legacy financial industry. I think that I have not necessarily unique, but I have a well-informed opinion to be able to relate ideas about the legacy banking system to Bitcoin. And oftentimes people think about Bitcoin as a solution in search of a problem, but it's because they don't understand the problem. So, the last third of the book is based on really understanding why everyone's going to have, or, why the Fed's always going to have to print money, and why that's not a possibility, why it's a certainty, why that actually caused the underlying economic structure to erode, and functionally why the currency ultimately fails. And so kind of pairing all those together. And, I didn't really have a lot of expectations in terms of how many books I would sell. I've sold more books than I thought I would. I currently have it exclusively on Safe's website that, realistically probably limits the reach from Amazon, but I'm doing it for principled reasons that I think that if the book is good and people find value from it, then they will either gift it or tell their friends where to find it, and that everyone who comes through can pay in Bitcoin. And that was important to me too, that there is some cognitive dissonance to recognize. It's like you've never gone to a grocery store and had the opportunity to pay with the U.S. Treasury or an Apple stock or MicroStrategy stock. But here, when you're buying this book, even if you don't want to pay in Bitcoin because you can pay in fiat because the book is intended to help people who don't understand Bitcoin to start to understand it, and they might not have it or know how to send Bitcoin, but it's sitting right there saying, you can pay me in Bitcoin, and that was important. So, I've been having fun being on the road, going to events, signing books for people. It's been really personally rewarding to get the feedback from people that hadn't yet been into Bitcoin. Like, I've had stories of people that, or maybe were, but didn't understand it, didn't, take the red pill or the orange pill, and kind of came back to it because of the book, hadn't read any of my prior writing, figured it out, and now they're in the process of getting their businesses set up to accept Bitcoin as payment. And I think that has to be the logical order. People have to first understand Bitcoin, and then they start accepting as payment, at a future date when, the hyperinflation really takes off. Like, everyone's just going to rush out the door at once and start having to demand payment for necessity. But those people that are forward about their actions and take agency, they first need to understand it. That's what the book is meant to do, to really deepen, harden. I view it, or I hope that it serves as a perfect complement to things like the Bitcoin Standard, as well as VJ's bullish case for Bitcoin. I kind of see it as like in my journey, the bullish case for Bitcoin wasn't yet out, but the Bitcoin Standard was. I'd met Safe a few years before. He helped me understand what money was before starting that book, and then he was shared an early draft of that unlocked a lot of things for me. I still had to reason through things, and so I view my book as a hyper logically ordered framework for people who need that, or kind of whose minds might work similar to my own, because Bitcoin clicked for me, made sense. I got it all from a combination of resources, one of them being the Bitcoin Standard, but then trying to enumerate the things that I consistently had to work through in my mind to consistently get back at the conclusion that Bitcoin was money. And so it was that, and then Mastering Bitcoin, I try to kind of provide what I think is a place in between those two books to share enough about the technical architecture of Bitcoin to understand how it works, as well as the why sound money is important, why Bitcoin shares the properties of things that have been historically sound money, and how it will replace all other currencies. And so, been having fun out there, talking to people that bought the book, selling it to people who haven't, and figuring out ways to get it into more people's hands.
Yeah, I think it's a great series, and I remember it when you were writing the blog series over at Unchained, hopefully more people get value out of it. So let's finish up here. So remember, it's Zaprite.com, Zaprite, and you said the Safe House as well. That's the Safe House. We'll put the links all in the show notes. But I guess I guess we'll just leave that with listeners that it's time, potentially, as you said, maybe this is the beginning of the then they fight us stage, but it's also time to start pushing back and start getting more people on our side. So let's leave it there. Parker, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me back on, Stephan. Always great to catch up.
I hope you enjoyed the chat. Make sure to share this episode and press like and give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode. Thanks, and I'll see you in the Citadels.